How's it going, guys? It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and betting live stream for this week's Arnold Palmer Invitational. Gonna get you guys ready for all of your exposure. If there's any questions down there in the live chat, we'll have a look at the weather forecast out there for Thursday and Friday, some ownership in those large field GPPs, a little bit of lineup construction, some contest selection out there as well. But hopefully everyone is having a great week so far. Of course, right, haven't seen you guys live out there since the weekend. We played some golf the last few days today, including a 30 to 40 mile an hour wind day, which was fun to say the least out there, and excited to see these players tested with a tough golf course. It'll make me feel a little bit better about how I played over the last day or so, and I'm super stoked out there for the signature event. What's going on? Michael also seems to be hyped about the signature field. What's going on? DeBird's long time no see down there in the chat. We'll get to Derek's question there in a little bit. Looks like he's playing that $18-10. I agree with you there, Derek. I think that's a great contest. What's going on, Brant? What's going on, Ross, as well? Mr. Awaken Up. Been a while since I've seen you down there in chat. Welcome on in. Barry and Nick as well. And where's Spieth? He didn't make it to this event, so he's going to have to earn himself in. And yeah, he didn't seem too happy about it, did he? So let's talk about this golf course. So what we're going to do before we talk about some ownership, the trends heading into lock, is get an idea of this golf course, which earlier in the week I heard a lot of talking heads talking about the rain on Wednesday. They got 0.1 inches today. So they did have about a 10-20 minute drizzle over there at the golf course, but this is still going to be a firm track. They were talking about the big bounce out there on Monday and Tuesday. And while they did cut back the rough a little bit today, I heard it's closer to 3.5 inches right now as opposed to the 4.5 inches that we had out there Monday, Tuesday. But with that little bit of rain that they got today, the sunny conditions forecasted for the next 3 days, it's still going to be 5.5 inches out there by the end of the week. So you're looking at your usual Bay Hill. And this golf course, I thought might play easy out there for Thursday. Not with this sort of weather forecast. We've got 30 mile an hour wind gust over there for tomorrow morning, and your sustained winds in that 15 to 18 mile an hour range. So in the morning, it looks like it's a little bit more gusty than what you have over there on Thursday afternoon. This is the HRRR model that we have up right here. And the main difference, I guess, conditions wise, is that it's a little cool in the morning, close to about 50 degrees for the first few hours. Also going to be a lot windier gust wise than what we have later on. But as the day goes on, you do have those temperatures getting a little bit more moderate, as well as the wind gusts calming down a bit. So I would say based on this HRRR forecast that the PM wave is going to play easier out there for tomorrow, but I wouldn't call it easy by any means. You're talking about a scoring average of 1 to maybe even 3 strokes over par. The Thursday pins aren't going to be all that difficult, especially because they know it's going to be this sort of forecast. So I would side closer to like 1.5 over par, that sort of thing. But if this was a Sunday setup and we had this sort of wind going on, I mean, it could play to a 76 scoring average. It could play a whole 4 strokes over par. So I'm super excited to go out there and see some of that carnage. By the way, conditions wise, this is what I played in today. It was literally blowing absolutely like crazy. There was a 570 yard par 5, and I reached it in 2, which is not something that I do very often. So it was a fun day to play golf, but for these players tomorrow, I wouldn't imagine that's going to be all that fun for them. By the way, it is allergy season down here in Florida, so I am struggling mightily when it comes to that. When we take a look at Friday, we don't have the HRRR forecast quite yet, but I'm going to take a look at all the different models at the same time here. They look relatively flat at this point. So while I do think there might be half a stroke advantage to playing in the afternoon tomorrow, on Friday, it's more so the receptiveness of the greens that's going to be leading to this edge. In the mornings, it will be a little bit softer than what you have in the afternoon, especially because on all these different models, it looks like it's going to be sunny from the sunrise out there to sundown. So I would expect the greens to dry up quite a bit. And if that happens, maybe it's not a massive difference over there for Friday. Maybe it's like a 0.3, 0.4 shot difference. But if you have an advantage to the AM guys over there on Friday, and then you have an advantage over here on Thursday for these guys that are going off a little bit later, you can see where a little bit of an edge could come through. Now, it's worth noting that the tee times this week aren't in waves. You do have tee times going off of hole number 1 and 2 sums throughout the entire day. But some of your guys that are going off later over there on Thursday are also some of the guys that are going off earlier over there on Friday. So it's maybe not the same one-to-one situation that we have for a full field event, but you can say, oh, only go out there and play the PM AM guys. But in general, when you take a look at those tee times, I think that there's a chance. It's not definitive by any means, but there is definitely a chance that we get a weather edge this week, and I'm incorporating it out there into my process. Now, I'm not going all in on this sort of weather. I am going about 25% all later starters, and later starters for me were guys like after 11:30 local time. So anyone that's teeing off in the last, I think it was like 40% of groups or something like that, I went and stacked in 25% of my builds. Now, the other 75% that I have in 150 max is going to be played straight up. I'm not going to be playing any sort of weather edge out there with my lineups. So, and I might have a few by chance, right, that still go out there and play 6 later guys just out there with my player pool, but it's nothing that I'm leaning into all that much. When I was trying to break some ties out there in my player pool as well, trying to get some guys down there in like that 6K range in particular, if one was an early starter, one was a later starter, and I was having some trouble choosing between the two, I let it guide my process that way as well. So it's nothing that I think is going to lead to like a 2-3 shot advantage. You know, if this works out the way that it looks right now, it's probably a 0.75 to maybe like a 1-stroke advantage at the very best. If not even, like it would not surprise me, right? If it was like a 0.2 shot advantage out there towards that wave, and it wasn't that crazy. It wasn't that like something you had to lean into to go out there and cash lineups here. So just worth noting when it comes to the weather, if I was playing Showdown out there for tomorrow, I might still have a few like mid to early starters. Reason I say that is conditions will be a little bit softer with the rain that they had today, especially like for the first half over there for Thursday. But with these winds kicking the entire day, I mean, even by the time we get to the end of Thursday, it is going to be much, much drier than what we had out there for today, and especially last night. So this course is going to change character over the first few days. It does look like Friday, Saturday are relatively calm, but when we get to Sunday once again, and this is looking way far ahead, so it is sporadic or unreliable to say the very least. They're calling for 30, maybe even 35 mile an hour wind gusts there. So hopefully we get some carnage at the, bookends over here on this event. Wouldn't mind it tomorrow to make myself feel a little bit better about my game. And then some Sunday carnage with those pin locations on the final round. That would be a whole lot of fun as well. So before we go into a little bit of choosing contest, lineup construction over there in Draftkings as well, let's take a look at the player pool, our projections over here for this week. We're going to go through some ownership up there towards the top end of the board. Also any of your player pool questions. So if there's anyone that you guys want me to do deep dive on, so that could be shots gained wise, right? We got the last 24 rounds that we can easily look at here. Course history, recent form, you guys name it. Just let me know out there for players down there in chat. But what we're really going to focus on after I get through the chat here in a second is the ownership from 8K plus. And what I like to do over here with these live streams is give you guys the ownership for the 8, 9, and 10K range. That way you kind of know where the field is going towards the top. And of course, my Patreon page, right, where you guys can find these spreadsheets for yourself, is going to have everything on there. Be able to do that down there in that 6 and 7K range. But a lot of the strategy, a lot of what we talk about towards the top end of the board, right, you can translate and use down there towards the bottom as well. And as long as you guys have a projection sheet that has good projections that you feel confident about going into every single week, you can use that strategy for yourself, right? You don't have to be a part of my Patreon page, but I will say if you are looking for the most accurate GPP projections possible, that my site is towards the top, if not the top, a lot of times when it comes to that sample size. So make sure to check it out if you guys haven't already. And let me see what's going on down there in chat. And I, again, apologize for the sniffles, but nothing I can do about it. It's pretty brutal right now. Any tips on the 18 max versus a big GPP? You just got to have a tighter player pool. So, I have about 31 players in my player pool this week where I'm at 50 max. At 18 max, you probably want 11, maybe 12 players at the very most, maybe closer to 10 in reality. That's the main change, I would say. 2-glove Luke, let's have a week. Yeah, I didn't play any gloves today. That was for sure. It was a no glove day for me out there. Any thoughts on Eric Cole? What's going on, Barry? By the way, long time no see for you as well. I would say that he's a great player. Love him. He's from down here in this area. I have a soft spot for him, but it's not his sort of golf course. You play him at tracks where off the tee isn't a really big priority. And around a course with 4 or 5 inch rough by the weekend, I think it could bear its teeth a little bit. Now, could he perform in single round sample sizes? Yes, because he's a really good putter, really good iron player that always leads to birdies, but he's got to hit fairways. So I think, 1-2 days this week, he could go out there, hit some fairways and score. But the other 2 days where it could go sideways real quickly. So I would worry about him for main slate, but for Showdown, he could be in play. No Fowler is a shame too. Yeah, I agree with that, right? Those two are the main ones, but in general, they do a pretty good job about getting those guys into tournaments. So, for as much as Spieth wanted to cry about it, by the way, Ricky didn't. So respect to him right there. I much prefer what Ricky said in terms of the response, but they get into a lot of events as well. So they don't have it off too bad, right? 0.1 inches, isn't that Dan Rappaport's nickname? I love that one there, Ross. And yeah, isn't he the one that everyone just shits on over there on Twitter? Yeah, I guess so, huh? Rev says, what's up, Luke? Any thoughts on McCarthy? I comp this course to Muirfield Village, so that's where a lot of my interest comes with the Denny McCarthy. I also get onto guys like Russell Henley because of that same sort of comp. So I think he's in play. I don't think he's a conviction play, though, because, if he's missing fairways, it is not going to go well. He doesn't have the power to get out of that rough, but I do think that on a spike week, when he can hit some fairways, that he has a chance to get there, just like he did at Memorial. Didn't win it, right, but had that second place to Victor Hovland. How can I find where the tees are from day to day? They don't post those ahead of time, Jay Grimes. Those are only going to be posted after they actually start play. They only give you the pin locations ahead of time. What's going on, Pat? Should we be targeting afternoon players? I think so. I would say that you can still have some early guys in there, but I would be shading towards that side of things. Should you use a weather edge in single entry? That is up to you, James, but I would say it's helpful. In my single entry, I'm going to have at least 4 guys out there from the PM wave, but if there's a guy you really like starting early, you can still play him in your single entry lineup. Do I know the players that are from the area? So there are a ton that are from here in South Florida, but there's a few up there, but I'm not going to name them off the top of my head. That's not something that I could really do off the top of my head. Anthony says DraftKings made the cut odds, make the cut odds, you said, sorry. And you can parlay up to 10 golfers if anyone is interested. Dude, 10-leg parlays, not where it's at. But I guess those are going to be like heavily minus money legs, like minus 200, minus 500 for some of like your elite tier players. Yeah, maybe, but not my sort of thing. Those long-term parlays, they're out. The odds are terrible most of the time. That's why. What's going on? Nick says, Luke, hope I'm doing well. I am. Just wondering, what did I shoot today? So I only made it through 14 holes, but I was plus 20 in the 40-mile-an-hour winds. Now, sounds terrible. Well above my handicap for sure, but hard conditions. But I made 4 birdies. So for as bad as I played score-wise, I had an 8 and a 9 on the scorecard. That really doesn't help things. But I hit a dart on my last 2 holes. I had a 10-footer for birdie. I made it. And then I went into the clubhouse. I skipped like the last 3, but then I saw it was wide open to 18. So I was like, fuck it, I'm going to go out there and play it. Hit a shot to 2 feet, and everyone saw it. There were like people sitting around the bar at 18. They all gave me a clap as I walked up. Yeah, I'm going back to golf in the next few days because we hit a shot like that. Right? It's always, you have a shitty day, right? You shoot way over par, then you hit a shot like that to make you come back. That's how golf gets you. What's going on, Michael? Decky seems like the form has not been great, but he seems too cheap. Yeah, I think you meant Decky there. Correct me if I'm wrong. Out there with what you're saying, but I think he's a good player at these hard, grinded out golf courses. You've seen him play well at Muirfield Village. You see him play well at major championships. The thing is, he's got to keep the ball in the fairway. And what you've seen when he struggled this year is that's been the big bugaboo. He's been kind of spraying it left and right. He has a 2-way miss going, especially the last few events. That's really what's been costing him. At the Farmers, at Torrey Pines, Genesis, when they went back to there as well, that was why he wasn't winning the thing. He wasn't up there in contention. Everything else was just fine for Hideki. What's going on, Big Mac? You bet Matsuyama as an outright, and you see I have the ownership at 12.7. You love a deep dive on him. So yeah, so I kind of just gave it here with Michael, but I think you're onto something there, man. Like, he's maybe not my favorite play this week. Like, full transparency, let me actually double check to see if he's my exposure. I'm 99% sure that I'm not playing him this week, though, but I don't want to give you incorrect information. So yeah, I don't have him out there in any of my lineups this week, but he's the kind of guy that I considered for quite some time. So in fact, he was so close to making my player poll that I wasn't even sure if I had him in there or not. Thoughts on Billy Ho? He's not my kind of guy at this sort of golf course, but, and this is a huge but, he's played well here before. So he's obviously bucked that trend and what I think about this golf course. And he's also played well at courses like Muirfield Village before. So he is the kind of guy, kind of like a Denny McCarthy. They're almost the exact same sort of archetype for this golf course. If they can hit a bunch of fairways, he's got a chance. But he has to have ceiling round with the fairways. Like, if he's not hitting 85, even 90% of his fairways over the weekend, he's going to be in deep shit. I mean, every time he misses the fairway, it's going to be a bogey over there on Saturday, Sunday. So he's got a chance, but he's got to play really, really well. Yeah, the walk-off darts are the way to end a round. Yeah, it was a 130 pitching wedge downwind. and had to take something off of it because it was blowing like 30 miles an hour, and landed at about 15, 20 feet short, bounced up next to the hole, rolled out a little bit, and it took a look at eagle, by the way. It was just 2 feet past the hole. Any idea on how Quaven sizes up for the track? He's really long off the tee, solid ball striker, high pedigree sort of kid. We're going to talk about him here in a bit, Brant. So I'll hold the rest of my thoughts on that. But yeah, I really like him this week. In fact, we're going to talk about him as a player pool play. Thoughts on Seabez and Cantlay. So Seabez, another one of those guys who's got to hit a bunch of fairways. So not my favorite, but he could get there, right? Always want to mention that. But there's guys that are more accurate. I think Cantlay, kind of like a 5 out of 10, I would say. Like, I like him more than Morikawa. I don't like him as much as guys like a JT, though. I don't like him as much as even guys like a Hideki Matsuyama. But yeah, like a 5.5 out of 10. He is getting some ownership, though. That's really the reason that's keeping me off of him in lineups, is if he was closer to like 13, 14%, I might be a buyer on him. And then has Mac Toma officially hit rock bottom? Yeah, dude, I think he hit rock bottom about 2-3 months ago, and he hasn't come out of it, right? A lot of times you hit rock bottom and then you start to rebound. Most people, at least, right, hit rock bottom and then try and get their shit together. Max hit rock bottom and he's just slinging the anchor against the ocean floor at this point. He's not getting back up. He's not showing us any sort of hope. But I'll say, Ross, and I always like to be transparent about this, or he could. And I am playing them this week. So, yeah, there's some nasty plays that you always got to get to, right? And, if you're going to do that, I guess I'll give the reasoning behind the Homa play. You do it with ballers, guys that have won multiple times on the PGA Tour. You do it with players that have played well at the golf course before. If they've shown us any sort of semblance of hope, right, around that kind of track, sometimes if you're going to find your game again, it's at a place that you feel comfortable playing. So, yeah, there's I guess a time and place where you can take a shot on that sort of player, and I'm doing it this week. And what do I think about Justin Thomas? I love him. So kind of just hinted at that going through this 9K range, but the form is just hard to pass up. Gaining close to 2 strokes per round. A lot of those, by the way, in some of the stronger field events that we've had over the last few months. It's not like he's beating up on these weak field events. Like Matt McNeely, I love him to death. I know he's gaining close to 2 strokes per round as well, but his shots gained metrics are coming from, he's still playing the signature events, right? So we can't completely shit on him, but his top tier performances where he's gaining like 2-3 shots gained to the field aren't in those sort of events. So at least for the most part, that's why I prefer guys like Justin Thomas. All right, let's talk about this ownership. So I promised we'd go through the ownership here. You can see it on there on the screen, but I've got Scotty and Rory actually pretty close this week. And I opened up Scotty at closer to like 37% ownership, Rory at like 29%. And as the week has gone on, you can see that gap has closed. Part of that because of the price tag, Rory is $1,200 cheaper. And my model has Rory as number 1, right? That's why I bet him this week. That's why I'm playing him as my conviction play up there towards the top end of the board. But as Scotty Scheffler starts to dwindle on the ownership, he becomes a better play as well. So I guess I'll spill the beans up top. I'm playing both of them out there in my player pool. I think that they are by far the best players that you have in this field. I still am trying to get over the field out there on both players, but I'm not going to have anywhere near to 2x leverage out there on both options. Right? If you did that, you'd have to have 60% out there of both. And I believe I'm at sub 50% out there on both players. So nowhere even close to that 2x leverage. And I guess I point this out just to say that you don't have to have 2x leverage on every single player in your player pool. Now, if they're a guy that's like 2-3% owned, you bet your ass you should have at least 2x leverage, right? If you're a 2-3%er, I would argue you should have 4 or 5x leverage at the very least on those sort of players. Up top, you've also got to consider that same thing. When a guy's 30-40% owned, you don't have to take them in every single lineup. Like, no one said that you just have to go out there and use that 2x rule as gospel. Like, it's a good rule of thumb to live by and something that I've lived by for most of my DFS career, not even just for golf. Like, that applies for a lot of other DFS sports that we talk about. But don't feel like you have to lock one of these top 2 up top. If you can't choose between the 2, then play both of them. And it's not even like they're the same play. Both modeling fantastic up there towards the top end of the board, but Scotty's $1,200 more expensive. And a lot of people would look at that as a huge negative, but it does force you on to different lineup constructions. So, by taking one player versus the other, you're not going to have identical lineups, right? Just one-offs between those 2. When you use one or the other, hell, even both in lineups, I have a handful of lineups. I think it's like 10% that have both players together. even if you go with that sort of build, it's another way to get different to the rest of the field. So I think you're going to see a lot of people taking one or the other in their player pool. And I guess I want to point it out that you don't have to choose between the two. You can go out there and use both of them, especially if you're a 150 maxer. Now, I know we had a question about the 18 max contest before, maybe how you would do it differently. In that sort of contest, maybe you do pick one or the other, because going with 9 and 9 down the middle is kind of limiting your options. Like having 9 lineups out there with each player, and then you got to get the other 5 spots right out there with those 9 combinations is doable. It is doable. I don't want to completely discount that, but it is tough to go out there and pull that off. Down here in this 9K range, the ownership is pretty spread out, I guess, with the exception of a Ludwig Aubert. Sorry, not Ludwig Aubert. Read the wrong tab there. Xander Schauffele at about 12.3%, but also guys like Hideki, Tony Finau even. I've got it at about 10% ownership. Guys like a JT, Morikawa, Patrick Cantlay over here in the middle end of the 9K range. It's kind of just choose your guys. And I guess there's a few that you could get a little bit cute with and go ahead and jump down, but I'm not overly enthralled with any of them. And I guess we'll go through those 3 really quickly. Xander Schauffele, we know the fact that he's missed 6 weeks at this point. If you didn't see my tweet earlier today talking about what he said during his press conference, didn't seem like he's all that convinced that he's 100% healthy yet. So that's why I don't even like him, even with that kind of ownership. I thought about playing him, but with guys like Rory Scotty there, I don't see one of those 2 guys not finishing top 5. It doesn't mean that one of them is going to be an optimal play, but it makes me think that, okay, like Xander, is he really going to go out there and top 5 his first event back? I would say more often than not, he doesn't. So that's why I'm personally staying away from him. I will say that he's playing golf. He's at this event. If you really want to get wild towards the top, you can do that. Like you use a Xander Schauffele, I think especially like single entries, like anything like $100, $200 single entry, that sort of thing, you're talking about sub 7% ownership. Hell, he might be sub 5% ownership in some of those contests. So I would argue, and I'm only 150 maxing out there for me. It's like, I don't even have any single entries that I'm going out there and entering. If I was in a single entry though, I might think a whole bunch about playing a Xander Schauffele. And really, he's the only example. Like in single entries, guys like Hideki, Tony Finau, they're still going to get some ownership. They'll still be 7 to maybe 10%. Usually the chalk gets chalkier in single entries, and the guys that are super low owned get even lower owned, but especially when it's a player with an injury concern. And, we've said this multiple times when we've gone through the lineup construction segment, but when you're in those single entry contests, and especially the higher dollar ones where, you're starting to enter more than, $33, more than $50 out there in a single entry, people tend to play extremely tight. They turn into nits out there, if we're going to use a poker term, out there with players, and they don't take on as much risk as they probably should out there in those kind of GPPs. So that's why I point that out with Xander Schauffele is, I don't know if I would personally have the stones myself, hence why I'm not playing single entry this week, but I think he's like the key up top if you're going to play that sort of contest. Moving down to this 8K range, ownership is also pretty spread out. In fact, your lowest owned player here would be a Sam Burns at 8.9%. McNeely is just under 10% there at 9.5%. But your highest owned player, I've got, I guess he's a 9K there, I guess would be Tommy Fleetwood. They're at like 15.2%. But in the 8K range, your highest owned player is there at Victor Hovland at 13.2%. So just like that top, like you can still pick your guys and go with them, but there are a few players that you could use for some leverage. Like a McIntyre, I've got a hair under 10%. A Keegan Bradley's at about 10% ownership himself. And those 2 that I just pointed out, McIntyre, Keegan Bradley, both players that I either played this week or was really close to getting to out there in my exposure. So, if you're going to get different, there are a few spots you can do it here in the 8-9K range. Even up top, like I guess you could go to Xander Schauffele if you want to get different. A vast majority of your leverage opportunities, though, are going to come down here in that 6 and 7K range. Guys like a Sahith Theegala, right? He's going to be sub 10% owned, right? Max Grazerman, who we'll mention a little bit later. Even Harris English, who, by the way, is one of the more popular players over here in the 6K range, he's still sub 10%. And that kind of player is always going to help you get some leverage, right? Less than 10% of lineups out there using that sort of player is going to let you move up the boards if that guy goes off. Like there's a Nick Dunlop, he's sub 5%. And Koiven, who we'll save for the end, I'll just say 1.6% owned. And you can see that yes right there. We're going to tease it a little bit more. I have quite a bit to say about the young player here in a second. Before we talk about these 7K players, there's a few that I want to point out towards the top. A few guys I didn't mention out there in the DFS preview on Monday. You can see here Will Zalatoris is down as a yes. Same thing with a Wyndham Clark. I bet Wyndham Clark at 55-1, and was able to get Will Zalatoris at 66-1 out there for an outright bet. Will Zalatoris, fantastic track record around Bay Hill. If you take a look at his event history, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Last year, by the way, when he first came back from injury, he went out there and nearly won the thing. He had a T4 finish, also had the T10 finish out there 4 years ago. Wyndham Clark also in contention out there last year, so did have that second place finish out there to a Scotty Scheffler, and he's 55-1. I know the form's not great on either one. I mean, you look at that, number 41, number 33 out there for those two players respectively, but you're talking about players that fit this golf course to a T. If they were in form, you're looking at them at like 30-1 at this sort of field. They'd be in the 9K range if either one of these two players had any form. And I'm willing to give players a pass when they're high upside players, like a Will Zalatoris, Wyndham Clark, guys that snap out of form rather quickly and can get into contention. And if you take a look at a lot of my comp courses out there for Wyndham, he's absolutely killed them. In fact, like the only one he doesn't have a lot of top finishes at would be Muirfield Village out there for Wyndham. So Willie Z, he's played great at pretty much all the comp courses that you have out there for these long, difficult tracks with long rough. So two guys that I didn't mention over there on Monday, but I rounded out my betting card. I had the Rory outright there at plus 850. Did mention that one over there in the live stream. And then we're going to have a few more top 10 bets that I added to the mix. What was it? Harris English that I added. And then was there one more? I guess it was just that one. That one, and then the two outright bets that I mixed in as well. Let's see. Where did I leave off? Thoughts? Oh, sorry. I already went through that. Apparently, fatherhood hit him much different than it did Scotty. So yeah, I'm assuming you're talking about Max Homa when you mentioned that. Unfortunate, I guess. How about a Dunlap punt play? So he's one of my favorite plays this week, actually. So he's sub 5% owned. I mentioned him during my DFS preview on Monday. Everything from fairway in is like top level, elite level stuff. And I'm not talking about like he's playing decent from fairway in, right? I'm talking about he's like one of the best players in the world if you just take away the off the tee game. So you take a look at the last 12 measured rounds out there for Nick Dunlap. What you'll see here is he's gaining close to 0.7 strokes approach. He's gaining around the green, which used to be a weakness for him, but now he's starting to gain out there in that category. And he's gaining close to 0.4 strokes per round putting, but losing, and you can't completely overlook this, right? Losing over a stroke per round off the tee. Now, I was watching them on the range today. They had that program over there on YouTube where they were showing a lot of players on the range, kind of doing commentary on how they were playing. Dunlap was absolutely striping it. Now, they didn't show one driver. He was only hitting wedges. His dispersion on those was like 5 yards from left to right. It was incredible. The distance control, by the way, was pretty much exact out there with every wedge he hit. One of the more impressive showings I've seen of a player on the range. And then he was also hitting his long irons extremely well. So, the iron play, I think that checks out there close to 0.7 strokes per round. If he can even be a neutral this week off the tee, which means maybe he only has like 2 water balls over his 4 rounds, that's a top 20 right there, maybe even a top 10 if he goes out there and really putts well or really hits his irons well. And if he goes out there and gains off the tee, which all he's got to do is just not hit water balls this week. If you don't know, Nick Dunlap hits the ball a long way. He's got 190 ball speed out there in his swing. So it's not the distance that is the issue out there for Nick Dunlap. It's him just keeping the ball on earth. Now, a lot of people may say like he just doesn't have a chance to do that. Well, you'd be wrong if you'd said that. And I saw a few people commenting saying that like, oh, it's a terrible play. I hope the people all go out there and play them. Well, I hope you know that you're a donkey for saying that sort of thing. Because if we take a look at what he's done over the last 6 months, guess where his last really good start was? On the PGA Tour. And I'm bringing it up right now in another tab so I can give you guys the exact finish. Oh, where was his last top 5 finish? Oh, at the Fedex St. Jude Championship, which, by the way, TPC Southwind, the course with the most water balls of any course on the PGA Tour. And at that event, he gained strokes off the tee. He gained close to a half a stroke off the tee per round. So just because he sprays it does not mean you can't play him at these sort of golf courses. I think a top 5 finish at the course with the most water balls in the world would be a perfect example, right, of why he's capable of doing that sort of thing. So, yeah, do I like Nick Dunlap? Yes, and I said this to my brother the other day. I think if he cleans up the off-the-tee play, he's a top 3 player in the world sort of talent. Like, I don't know, look at the fairway stats from in and look at the last, 5 months for Nick Dunlap. And by the way, I'll show you guys. I have it up here on the other tab. It is unfucking believable what this guy has been doing. Gaining approach. I mean, look at this. 0.7 strokes per round, 0.5 strokes per round, over a stroke per round over there at the Pebble Beach Pro-Am. Around the green, right? Used to be a weakness. I mean, look at this. Look at all that negative towards the beginning of last year. Into the positive lately. I mean, the putter is ridiculous, right? Gaining close to 2 strokes per round, gaining 1.8 strokes per round. Like, lovely stuff, right? But this off the tee play, which has been the issue, loss. Like, there's a clear problem. And if he fixes it, this tee to green profile, or this fairway, I guess, to green profile that you have over here is one of the best that I've ever seen. Like, you compare this to any of the other elite tier players out there, you cover the off the tee tab, right? You just cover it over there on the right side. You think you're looking at Rory or Scotty Scheffler. Like, that's how good these stats has been. And if you can't tell, I think he's going to be a damn good player when he gets that figured out, because you can't teach the putting. You can't teach that sort of iron play. And he has that. He has the untangibles. Hi, mate, a little bit late watching from the start. Welcome on in, Brian. Hopefully you're having a lovely, jubbly day. Thoughts on the Kirk punt? David, I would say that he's not my favorite play. He's always an option, I would say, because he's not the worst off the tee player, but you play him at courses that are more positional. That's usually where he has the consistent top 20s, the consistent top 10s, like a Waialae Country Club, Sony Open. You play him at like RBC Heritage, that sort of thing, because you can rely on him to go out there and finish top 20. If you're using him as a punt, though, right, that's part of your question right there. I'm not against it, because you're getting low ownership, right? It's the whole reason to go to a punt like that. Super cheap as well, so he's opening up some salary. I would say if you're in a large field GPP, that you can go that direction. Maybe not my favorite play. I'd prefer Nick Dunlop, I suppose, but you can. He's usable, that's for sure. I was early on Clanton and Potgater, so you're excited to see what my thoughts are on Jackson. Yeah, let's just talk about him right now. So for as excited as I am about Nick Dunlop, and there's a reason why I wanted to sing the praise of Nick Dunlop, all the people that I'm connected to that really know golf, that especially like Corn Ferry guys are out there talking to caddies, talking to players all the time, tell me that this Jackson Koiven kid is a way better prospect than Nick Dunlop. So if I think Nick Dunlop might be a top 5 player someday, well, this Koiven kid, I haven't seen it myself. I can't confirm this, right? I can't confirm the Nick Dunlop style. We've seen it with the stats. I know the potential's there on that sort of player. Jackson Koiven's getting sung more praises than that sort of guy. In fact, Taylor Pendrith used to be that sort of player. Like when he was super young, you heard a lot about him growing up. Jackson Koiven is now that new hot prospect. And what I'll say about this kid is that he's number 2 on the list behind Luke Clanton out there for points. And Luke Clanton looks like a generational player. Like, at least from what we've seen so far, he looks like a top 5 player in the world someday. And by the way, the future of golf is so bright when it comes to these young players. They're going to lap the players that are out there at the top right now. Like, and I can guarantee you this. These young kids that come out here and tour are going to be so much better than these guys are in the top 5, top 10 right now. Like guys like Tony Finau that we like thought were good are going to look like they suck in like 5-10 years because of how good some of these guys are going to be. Jackson Koiven's going to be one of those players. That's my hot take on him. This week may not work out. Like, by the way, I think the reason why I had the nuts to go out there and actually use him in my player pool is Ludwig Gobert, as an amateur out there at this golf course, finished top 25. So we've seen guys that are high potential players, guys that are high pedigree players, show up at this golf course as amateurs in the past and have some success. So, I think a good week for Jackson would be to make a lot of birdies, go out there, lean into your putter, which can get super hot. Maybe finish like 20th, that sort of thing. Like that's probably as good as it's going to get, in my opinion. But at 1.6%, he's only $6,000. He's down there at the bottom. If he outscores his placement by making a shit ton of birdies, he could get there. Like, he's got higher birdie upside than all of these other guys. Like, a lot of these guys are short players out of form, right? Jackson Koiven is in much better form. He's playing fantastic over there on the college circuit, and he's got a higher birdie pedigree than those sort of guys around him. So if he finishes top 20, let's say that someone else down here does too. Like, hell, it might be Chris Kirk. It might be a Pavon he's played about the Farmers, another comp course that I have for this sort of week. But Koiven, if he also finishes top 20, I would argue that he's got a really good chance to outscore some of those other players because of that young, aggressive mindset. Like, that's what you see with these college players. They go after every single pin. They hit the ball a long way so that they can take advantage of the par 5s. Some of the other guys down here don't have that kind of firepower off the tee. So yeah, that's the Quaven take. I think he's got a really bright future ahead of him. And I haven't really seen it myself. I guess that's the one disclaimer I'll put out on it is I am relying on what I've heard from some other people out there, but I respect their opinion. They're the ones that told me that Dunlop might even win out there in the PGA Tour. It wasn't at the Amex that they said it. It was a few starts before that. He had played a few times on the PGA Tour, goes out there in Amex and just absolutely destroys it, goes out there and nukes and wins. Quaven is getting that same sort of treatment. So it's just, I don't know. We'll see if they're right. Who knows? So what's going on? It said you feel like rolling the dice with Cam Davis or Stevens. So yeah, Cam Davis, long player off the tee. I guess that's the main positive you have there. Short game has also gone a lot better. So, you're rolling the dice. I think you're getting some low ownership there. So that would be the main thing with the Cam Davis. Sam Stevens, his price is, I guess, the one thing that holds me back here. Like, he's more expensive than he probably should be. Like, even $6,900. Like, there are guys around him that I just think are better players. But he played well at the Farmers. Farmers, by the way, one of my comp courses that I'm using for the API. So he's shown us an ability at courses where you have to hit the ball a long way, but you have to go out there and hit your long irons well, that he's capable of getting into contention. So I think he's a high upside play. I guess full transparency, I'm not using him, but he's in play for sure. Any thoughts on Davis Thompson and you're looking at Hadman, you're saying, as a GPP flyer? So yeah, we'll start with Davis Thompson. So decent off the tee player when he's playing well. He's long and accurate. So you do need a spike week though. He's been a little sketchy off the tee over the last few events, but if he's on off the tee, he sets up well from that perspective. So I like him this week. You guys know me, right? I'm just so blunt. I'm going to tell you it straight up. I'm playing him this week. So yeah, I'm using Davis Thompson. Hadman, I'm not using. So if you're looking for a flyer, just know what you're getting yourself into. The same sort of players like a Denny McCarthy, a few of those other guys like Seabez down there towards the bottom, if they're going to make the top 5, top 10, it's because they're hitting 90% of their fairways. Guys like that don't do that often, but they do that a few times every single year. And if they do, they've got a chance at it. Yeah. And Kirky does have decent course history. He's finished like top 10 a few times. So kind of like Henley at some of these kind of venues, like you have your players where maybe it suits their eye off the tee. They're able to go out there and hit more fairways. They have one really clear path out there to the optimal. It is a narrow path because of how hard it is to go out there and hit that many fairways, but it's doable. Hopefully I already answered your question on that, but I think he's a high upside player. By the way, Brian, I said that because I love the GIFs that you post in the Ship It Nation Discord of Lovely Jubbly. In fact, every time I see it, I laugh out loud. So I'm glad that you found it funny too, because dude, that brightens my day every time I see it. I'm not kidding. It's absolutely hysterical that you post that. What am I take when I love how a guy's game shapes up at the course, but he falls on the wrong side of a weather edge? So yeah, Zach, I see sort of a weather edge out there for this sort of week. I'd still play them, right? So there are guys that are morning wave golfers, even towards the middle to bottom end of pricing, that I'm still playing out there in lineups. If you like them enough, you still use them. That's my full take on it. Unless it's the kind of weather edge where you're going, you know what? I'm completely eliminating one side of the tee times. This week, at least for me, maybe it's different out there in your process. It's not that big of an edge, but if it were, yeah, then maybe you do have to avoid those kind of players. What's going on? He said, Jay Rose seems like a guy down low who always pops up in the first round and then steadily cruises off. Yeah, you might want to play him for round one showdown. Hell, even a first round leader sort of bet. Jay Rose, just like Kirky, hits a bunch of fairways. He could shoot -7, -8. Like, it's not completely impossible, but yeah, Jay Rose, these old guys down low. I hate to call them old. They're like mid-30s. I'll be there in 5-6 years myself. So I should stop talking shit. I guess Rose a little bit older. He's in his 40s, but you get the point. I prefer the young studs. They hit it a little bit further. Golf is deep would be like falling into Mia Khalifa. Oh boy. Now we're throwing some wild names down there in chat. TJ says, am I leaning grinder types or upside in my player pool? I've got a good mix of both, I'd say, TJ, especially like large field GPPs. You've got to have some upside, but you're also going to need some guys to grind out some top 5, top 10s, not make a whole bunch of bogeys. Up top, I'm more worried about the actual skill set of saving pars, right? Bogey avoidance. Towards the bottom is where it's more upside. So that's where guys like Quaven that can outscore his placement come into play, and also guys like Nick Dunlap, right? But up top, like let's think that through. Like if you had a 9K player, you don't want them to finish like T20, right? If they T20 and they make a shit ton of birdies, they'd have to make a whole bunch of birdies to go out there and make the optimal lineup. I mean, I'm talking like 20 plus around the API, which is super tough around this kind of golf course. Down low though, right, when they're only 6K, where, you know, a 6K optimal might be a T15, something like that. That's why I lean upside down low, because you don't have to finish top 10. You don't have to have that grinded out mindset if you're a player that isn't as expensive, I'd say. You're high in Fleetwood too. Any worry about him teeing off early? Yeah, maybe some worry, Derek. But as I mentioned, with somebody asking about the tee times a little bit before, I think it was Zach that asked about it. It's not the end of the world to me. Like, it's maybe a shot advantage, I'd say, out there between the two waves. And I think that's if things go perfectly. It might be like a stroke advantage. Yeah, I'm still on Fleetwood for sure. Thoughts on Spawn? Really good form. Dude, he's been hitting the ball beautifully. He's hitting a bunch of fairways. He's driving the ball further than he ever has in his career. I followed him a lot around the Cognizant. I'm a big fan of his game. Personality, he needs to liven up just a little bit, in my opinion, out there on the golf course. But really good guy, really, really good ball striker. So if you're a ball striking truther, he's in play for sure. Most volatile player that I'm playing, Jackson Coyven. No doubt about it, is Jackson Coyven. Dude, he could finish dead last. Like, that would not surprise me, like, at all, actually, if he was like plus 10 tomorrow and there's like 40-mile-an-hour winds. I also wouldn't be surprised if my buddies were right and he's like -4 and up there in the top 5. So definitely Coyven. Can Highsmith make the top 5 or 10 at least? He can, but it's really tough after you have that breakthrough victory. So, you know, if it was an Aubert that won last week and then it's coming into this week, I wouldn't worry about it at all, because he's used to the win. He's used to the spotlight, not really going to change his life. Joe Highsmith quite literally had a complete 150 out there for this week. So I'm a little worried about that. I probably wouldn't invest on him. Thoughts on Willie Z? So I bet him outright this week at 66-1. I think he's a fantastic play. Ownership's not through the roof. I've got him a little bit lower owned, actually, than guys like Daniel Berger. Willie Z, clearly the better player over the last year or so. Long term, you could actually argue that they're on the same sort of level. But yeah, give me Willie Z. 66-1, a hair lower ownership. I'd go that direction all day. And how much tougher do I think 17 is going to play? So I thought it was going to be a lot tougher because of the extra water balls with that slope. But Michael Kim put out a tweet today saying that balls that hit that slope are holding because the rough is so deep. So unless they cut it overnight, which they could do, they could take a little mower out there, right, and just make it a little bit shorter so that balls roll down there. If they don't, it's probably going to play about the same, I would say. You may have missed it, but Nick Taylor thoughts. So the form for Nick Taylor is incredible. So to show you guys how he's been hitting the ball lately, he's gaining over 0.9 strokes per round with the approach play, putters into the positive, but you know, he actually usually gains more than that. So he's been a little bit disappointing there. And then the off the tee play. Now, this is the big red flag. You're losing strokes in that category. You're short and not that long off the tee. That's kind of the issue with Taylor. He's not an elite player when it comes to accuracy or that distance. That's where it could go sideways. Now, he's also played well at some of these positional golf courses, like RBC Canadian Open that he won. That was a positional golf course off the tee. Heck, even TPC Scottsdale, where he hits a bunch of fairways around there. That's how he gets to the top end of the leaderboard. If he can pull that off, he's in play, especially with these kinds of irons. Like, and it hasn't just been the wedges that have been gaining him all these strokes. If you take a look at the proximity buckets over the last 24 rounds, it's been some of the mid to long irons, which you've got to have around Bay Hill. It's a well-balanced approach distribution. Lots of great plays around Nick Taylor too. Yeah, and the ownership's up there as well. So, you know, I mentioned Harris English here, who, by the way, I did take for a top 10 at plus 750. He's in that same sort of ownership range. So, you know, about 8%. And as you mentioned, there are guys around him that are solid plays. Like Pot Getter, the pot getter, as we call him. Like I've got a soft spot for him, especially with him just crushing over there a few weeks ago. Definitely, he didn't get the outright cash, but we can't hold it against him, right? Still had a fantastic week out there for our lineups. Yeah, there are pivots around him too. And Harris English, I guess I wouldn't really call him a pivot because of the ownership, but he is in that sort of range. Let's see. And of course, Derek. All right, that's all for the player pool stuff. Let me see. Yeah, we talked about English a little bit. We didn't talk about Grazerman. So I guess before we go through our looking for contest selection, and then a little bit of lineup construction as well. Max Grazerman, the last player I want to throw by you guys. He's starting later, closer to noon. So I like the tee time if you're somebody that's a weather truther. Ownership is about average, I'd say, down here towards the bottom end of the 7K range. I wouldn't be like one of your quote unquote low owned guys. at this portion of the board, but Graceman's got plenty of length off the tee for this sort of golf course. And if you take a look at the stat profile recently, it's been a sneaky, I would say, gaining on approach, gaining with the putter. Off the tee has been a little bit too inaccurate out there for my liking, but he's got the power to go out there and get the job done if he has a really good accuracy week. And I guess this is the point I want to point out here, guys, is I know we were talking about some of these shorter, more positional players. We actually had a lot of questions about shorter, more positional golfers. The reason why I'd rather play a Max Grazerman or a Nick Dunlop, for example, right, who's missing a bunch of fairways, is if these guys hit a bunch of fairways, they're going to be 30 yards ahead of all those other players. And hitting 80, 90% of your fairways is not an easy thing to do. Like, even if you're an accurate driver of the golf ball, you're only going to do that a few times a year. Guys like Grazerman, guys like Dunlop are going to have maybe one less event that they're hitting like 80, 90% of their fairways. And if they do, they are just such a huge leg up over some of those other players. That's why I really like these kind of guys in GPP. So go over to the last 24 rounds. We can show you what those shots gained metrics look like. Still losing off the tee, kind of surprising there, but you can see the iron play and the putting, really what his bread and butter is out here on tour. Maybe a little bit of a sneaky low-owned play they could take in that portion there. Let me bring up DraftKings. We're going to go through some of the contests that they have available, and then I'll build a lineup or two together to show you guys how that's done as well. So in terms of the contest, you do have that $25, which hasn't filled quite yet. There won't be overlay. There's only 10,000 spots left, but it is an extremely top-heavy contest. 20% to first place, maybe not the worst thing that I've seen, but that, along with the drive the green, the big $5, which I did 150 max, is really top-heavy. So, you know, I'm still playing in it, right? I like my big 150 maxes. I like my big payouts, my top heavy top heavy payout structures that you have out there, but it's not for everyone. Like, if you're not comfortable losing a good portion of your entries every single week, then don't play the big 150 max. And we actually had a comment about it before, right? Wasn't it Derek out there towards the beginning? Let's go back to it actually. Right, Derek was saying like he's taking my advice and starting to do the 18 max. That's $10 per entry, so that's $180 to go out there and enter. If you're a player that's not willing, right, to lose all of that week to week, like I'll say, if you're 150 max player, you take a look at those people's results every single week. Most of them absolutely suck. Most of them are just bleeding all their money every single week. I've been on a good run recently where I've been profiting, even not when I'm finishing top 5, top 10 in GPPs, just because my core and player pools have been on fire recently. Like, I guess I got to pat myself on the back a little bit here sometimes, right? Without takedowns, I'm still profiting the last month in those GPPs, which is in the far minority of players out there. That is not something that you should be expecting to do in that sort of contest sustainably. When they're that top heavy, you have to have a top level finish to get a portion of that pie, to go out there and profit in those sort of contests. The ones that you should be playing in, to go back to that contest, are ones like the 18 max. Those are the more sustainable contests. It's 10% to first place. It's 10% of that out there to 10th place. So even if you finish in 10th, you're still getting a really sizable payout. You're still going to profit out there on that sort of slate. Take on those sort of contests. And hell, it doesn't even have to be that. You can go to these single entries like this driver here. What is this? A $200 single entry with 55 entries. Now, I personally prefer the single entries that are a little bit larger than that. So is this one here? Let's see. Yeah, right. This is the driver single entry right here, the bigger $200 one. This isn't the best payout structure. It is still 20% to first place. But if you finished in the top 5 here, which by the way is a lot easier to do against 300 entries as opposed to 50,000 like you have in those big 150 maxes, you're going to feel really good about winning a couple grand. Hell, maybe even 6-4 grand like you have here with these top 2 spots. You go to the $100 single entry, which the main one probably already filled. But if you go to some of the smaller ones down here, like this one, that's way too small. No one wants to enter that sort of contest. Where did we? Yeah, I guess most of them filled is what we're seeing over here. You can see the tiers contest down there, which, God, I hate tiers. I'll never play it. It's so stupid to me. I just don't enjoy it, right? I prefer the regular DFS over that tiers format. A lot of the good ones have already filled, but you know, that $200, if that's in your bankroll, if that's within your budget, you might want to consider that sort of thing. And the big $10 18 max, I believe that one already filled, but if they post a secondary, that might be something you want to go out there with 50 max. So usually my advice for going and reserving contests is to do this on a Tuesday. I usually do it Tuesday morning. I go out there, get all my exposure in there. Like this contest over here, like I 150 max that. Look at that, actually just filled over there with those 71,000 entries. I don't take a risk on that. Like sometimes even over here on Wednesday, this contest to go over there and fill. DraftKings doing a decent job at sizing these, but you can see, right, all of them are pretty much filled at this point. In terms of your lineup construction, you really got to ask yourself before you're building whether you're going to lean into that weather edge. So if you are going out there and trying to take a lot of your later starters, then you need to have the tee time sheet ahead in front of you. But what I'm doing for a lot of my lineups is I'm just shading towards the later players. Like, for example, Scotty Scheffler has an early tee time out there for tomorrow. If you're completely leaning into that weather edge, that's going to put you off of world number one, who could go out there. He showed us last year, by the way, on a really windy weekend at API. He went under par both rounds and just absolutely trounced the field, right? That's why he went out there and won by so much last year. He's capable of doing that out there in harder conditions. So if you're going to go out there and play the weather edge, at least for me and a lot of my lineups, I'm doing it with my players down low. I'm doing it when I'm actually building my player pool, as opposed to actually doing it when I'm building my lineup. So when I'm going out there and I'm going through this lineup construction, it's not really so much the weather that I'm thinking about, because I've already accounted for that right ahead of time. It's more so making sure that I have the differentiation that I need, that I'm not going to duplicate myself with a whole bunch of other lineups out there, and that when my players hit, I have the leverage to move up into the top end of that contest. So up top, maybe you start with a Rory. Like, it's going to be tough to get different up here unless you go with Xander and single entries, as we mentioned before, which, by the way, that's the bold move of the week, if you're willing to play Xander and single entry. But yeah, most people, right, aren't going to take that kind of strategy. So let's start with the Rory. Our second man in, we're going to throw in a Fleetwood, who, he might be 20% plus in some of these contests. So we're starting with two pretty chalky players right there. Our last four spots here are really where I'm starting to think about the ownership. So let's throw in a Wyndham Clark, who I wouldn't call him low owned, but I also wouldn't call him high owned. They're towards the bottom end of the 8K range. Let's go with a mid to top end of the 7K range guy. And I think Matty Fitz would fit this sort of lineup. And you can see, right, I'm not looking at the weather, because I know that my player pool is mostly guys starting PM AM or later out there tomorrow than earlier over there on Friday. So I don't have to worry about it all that much. And hey, I might have lineups that stack a few too many morning guys. And on my optimizer, I'm probably going to set a limit of at most 3 guys that are starting in like the first 3-4 hours of tee times. And that's probably how I'll try and limit getting these sort of lineups. I might have a few that sneak in there that I hand build, right, that might have a couple too many AM guys. But, to avoid that, right, especially if you're really leaning into the weather there, just bring up the tee time sheet, right? Go out there, make sure that you're not stacking too many of the guys that are in the early gusty conditions, and you'll be totally fine with your lineup construction. So guys like, and I'm just going to double check the tee times on these, like Thigala, he's a morning guy. So, right, he'd be a player that you'd kind of have to keep an eye on. A Fitzpatrick is a later starter, so you don't have to worry about him out there in that sort of build. Let me look at Wyndham and Fleetwood real quick. I know Rory is a PM wave. So Fleetwood, he's an AM, right? So that's 2 guys that are starting on that side of things. And then who was the last one? It was Windy Clark. The last one I'm going to double check. And he's a PM guy. So as long as our last guy here, right, is a mid to later starter, that's 4 of our 6 spots where we're leaning into that weather edge. So I know we had the questions about potentially using guys that are starting a little bit earlier. I'm personally going to have them out there in my lineups. Now, is the weather going to hopefully help us out? Still, yes, right? That's why we shaded in that direction for most of our exposure. But especially in an elite tier field like this, it's not something I'm completely leaning into. Let me see where we left off, go over any questions, and then we're going to talk about some prop stuff afterwards. So that is it for the DFS side. Any DFS questions that you guys have, go ahead, throw those down in the live chat right now. But after we go through these last few questions, we're going to talk about props. So that'll be over here in Underdog and Prize Picks. I've already put up my free blog over there and bet the number, but we can chat a little bit more about what I'm doing over there for tomorrow. And yeah, any questions that you have over there as well. So if you have anything for Underdog and Prize Picks, feel free to go ahead and ask that as well. Graceman's a good first round play. I agree with that for sure. You're fading round score props for tomorrow. Most of them seem a full stroke too low. I completely agree with you, Mark. I think it's going to play super tough. Maybe even like 2.5 strokes over par. So I'm right there with you. What's going on, B Hayes? What's up, Luke? Thoughts on playing Aubert, Rory, and Fleetwood together? Ooh, that's pretty expensive. So you got what, a 10-8, 2 9K guys out there in a lineup. I'm okay with it as long as you like some guys down there in the 6K range. So just know that it is a little bit top heavy there. Thoughts on Cantlay, decent driving, long irons, etc. Form perhaps on an upward curve. So yeah, the form is trending the right way. He's been playing a little bit better here in 2025. I think the course fits like a 6 out of 10 though. Like he is a good driver. He's a good long iron player, but I wouldn't call him elite in either category, right? Like he's not a Scotty, he's not a Ludwig when it comes to the driving. He's not a Lucas Glover, he's not a Colin Morikawa when it comes to the long irons. So 6.5 out of 10 is probably where I'd put him. You can see I'm warming on him a bit. I said 5 before. Now I'm at a 6.5 out of 10. But yeah, I'd leave it there. Like he's a decent play. Win seems consistent until after 4, if you're reading this correctly. No, Brian, you may have been reading it a little bit incorrectly, but I'll show you where it's a little bit different there. Look at the gust early, right? It's closer to 30 miles an hour, 33 miles an hour. The sustained winds do stay relatively consistent. So maybe that's what you were referred to, but the wind gusts are the big difference. 30 as opposed to 20 miles an hour there in the afternoon could make a rather big difference with scoring. And especially with the course getting warmer, right? It's like 50 degrees in the morning and it's 60 in the afternoon. It'll play easier as the day goes on. Wind and gusts seem consistent. The gusts do not, Brian. You might want to reread that. By the way, Brian, I don't know if you just say this kind of like BS in chat to troll, but if so, dude, cut it out. It's annoying. What's going on, Derek? You like Rory, Fleetwood, and Nick Taylor, so that means you have to get different with somebody like Hovland? Yeah, because Nick Taylor is like 8-9%. Same thing with Harris English. Like he's not going to get you that different towards the bottom. He's also not mega chalky. Yeah, you're going to have to throw in a pivot or two, I'd say. Pavon, he would definitely be a pivot. Pick 6 has tournament birdies at 17.5 for Scotty and Rory. Any thought on that? I don't do any like week-long birdie stuff, Steven. I try and be as transparent as I can when it comes to giving this analysis. And that's not something that I've ever bet before in my life. Like ever. Like I've never bet an entire event like birdie line before. So that's a little bit over 4 birdies per round. That seems like a lot. This is a golf course where the birdie average is probably going to be about 3.5 per round. Now they average more than the field, probably 4.5 per round. So they'd have to hit 4.5 per round to go over, right? 4.5, 9, multiplied by 2, you get to 18. I think it's a decent line, like 17.5. It's the first time I've ever gone through these full event lines before over here on live stream. Not my favorite. Sam Burns. So I'm wondering what you want to know about Sam Burns. I guess I'll give you the Spark Notes version because he didn't ask for anything in particular. He's a low owned. I've got him at sub 10%. So if you're looking for a little bit of pivot, you could go that direction. He is a little bit too inaccurate off the tee for a lot of people's liking, but like I've mentioned with a few players down low, right? Dunlop, some of those guys that kind of spray it. He hits a bunch of fairways and it sets up really well for him, especially with that Bermuda grass putting. The best Bermuda grass putter that we have towards the top end of the field. All right, we're going to go through props now. By the way, if you have any DFS questions, I will still touch on them rather quickly. But the main focus here is going to be on underdog and prize picks. And you can see some of the averages from last year, but it's worth noting that conditions were a lot easier last year than what we usually see. It was relatively calm for 3 of the 4 rounds. It was firm and fast for the weekend, but the first few days were a lot softer than what we had hoped for. And this week, I thought that might be the case with the rain that they had forecasted today, but with them only getting 0.15 inches, like they said over there, the observed weather, then that's not going to lead to a soft course. It was already firm and fast. It might be a hair softer tomorrow than what you had for the last few days, but you're talking about a brutally hard golf course. So I think with the wind that we're getting tomorrow, which early on is look close to 30 miles an hour, that it might play like 2.5 strokes over par. So that would be nearly 2 strokes harder than what you had for last year. I think conservatively, I'd be willing to put it at like 1.5 over par scoring average. So something like a 73.5 is where I personally have it projected, but with potential to maybe even get close to 75 strokes. If it was the weekend, if this was a Sunday round, I would say it might play 2.5, 3 strokes over par, but we're getting round 1 pin locations, which tend to be a lot softer than what you have for over the weekend. So I think that's going to make the difference out there with the scoring. So birdie average probably stays close to 3.5 per round. I might go down a little bit, maybe down to like 3.3 per round, just with the wins. The bogey average is where most of the difference is going to come. I think the bogey or worse average is at least 4 per round. And I could say that rather confidently. I think there's a chance it's 4.5, 5 per round over there for round number 1. So when we get over here to the sheet over here on prize picks, they have some bogey or worse lines posted at 3.5. They actually have them for pars or better, but it's essentially the same thing as a bogeys or worse line. If you just look at it the other way, I think there's a lot of value on some of the guys that they have posted for unders on pars or better, or, in theory, overs on bogeys or worse, if you're looking at it the other way. Other props here were fairways and greens. I think the fairway average might go down a little bit with the winds. Green average probably going to go down a little bit as well. So, around 8 fairways per round, I think would be realistic to project for. And then your green regulation average at most, probably about 10.5 per round, if not closer to 10.25 per round. So in general, harder conditions than what we had for last year. And if you guys saw the article, free blog I did over there on the Bet the Number site, you guys already know a few props that I've entered. Those would be the Xander Schauffele and the Colin Morikawa over on strokes. And they haven't bumped, which I'm thrilled about. I know they're not really plus EV values, but if it's going to play 1.5, 2 strokes over par, these guys could gain 1.5 strokes to the field and still go over, right? Still shoot even par and go over this sort of line. Xander's coming in off 6 weeks of rest, the rib injury. Already said in his press conference today that he wouldn't be scared to withdraw if he feels anything happen tomorrow. Then you got Colin Morikawa, who, if you've taken a look at the course history, has missed the cut at this event the last 2 years. So you're talking about Xander with the rust, Colin Morikawa with the lack of course fit around this sort of track. And all they have to do, right, is only gain 1.5 strokes to the field, which I know it's like, oh, these guys normally gain like 1.5 strokes to the field. That's their baseline. Sure, but not at a golf course that doesn't fit their game like this. And also not at signature events, right? That 1.5 shots gained baseline that you have for these sort of players, that's where like these elite tier guys live when it comes to the shots gained profile, is against regular field events. Your events with 144 players where you have some slapdicks that really impact the averages. Not when it's the top 72 players that you have on the PGA Tour, not when it's a signature level field like you have for this week. Their baseline is going to be closer to like 1.25 per round when it comes to their shots gained. So that's why I really like their over here. Even if they have a slightly better than average day for themselves, that would still be an over. And I personally have the hit rate on both of these at least projected hit rate at closer to like 59, 60%, which is well over the ROI marker that we're looking for. So both of those were props that I mixed in, even with just the 2.7x payout. That's all you get out there on a correlated slip on Underdog. But compared to Prize Picks, right, you entered this same two over here, you'd only get a 2.5x payout. So it's a little bit better, right? 0.2 units better out there on your bet, which is, it's always important to line shop, right? Make sure you're getting the best lines available, regardless of where you're entering. Do I prefer DFS or props? I love both of them, Mark. It's kind of hard to choose between the two, right? It'd be like choosing my favorite son or daughter or that sort of thing. I don't know if that'd be fair. You're not trolling. You're just saying it's hard to see the gust. Okay, I got you, Brian. But yes, good thing I pointed it out to you then, right? So you're able to get that strained for yourself. I'll try and zoom in more next time, Brian. I actually had someone comment that on my last live stream I did, said that it was a little bit small. I'll blow it up a little bit more. And I'm looking at it right now, like especially this page. I'm looking at the live stream right now. That is hella small. I can see I'm nearsighted, so I have really good sight close. That's why I'm a good shooter. I shoot a lot of guns. And I'm very accurate. I can understand why you guys are having issues. My bad. I guess same thing with windy, right? You can probably do the same thing over there. Oh my God, I didn't know you could do this. I'm so sorry, guys. Guys, and I hope you understand why that's the case. Like my eyesight is actually that good where it doesn't bother me. I didn't realize it was that small, but I appreciate you guys. I appreciate you letting me know at least, Brian, out there with that. That's all I've got, all I got though, guys. I entered a few other slips over here on Prize Picks, but what I did, because I do think fades are the play. So I took these two overs. You guys can tell that I think conditions are tough. If you wanted to find fades on Prize Picks, like say I wanted to find like a 2-man slip, I'm only going to get that 2.5x payout. So what I personally did is I took a fade over here in Prize Picks and then I mixed it in with a Euro golf prop. So I'm going to leave those behind the paywall though, right? You guys already got the free slip that we're doing out here for round number 1. If you guys want to see all the other pieces of exposure that I'm taking, the Patreon page is the place to get all of that. Link in the description, just like we have for the DFS tier. Yeah, there's an under on strokes I took over here for the DP World Tour. If you want to see who that was, make sure to check it out over there on the site. Reasoning for that, by the way, is conditions are supposed to be extremely calm tomorrow over there on the DP World Tour. Scoring average last year was about even par. I'm projecting for closer to half a stroke under. So these guys gaining 1.5 strokes to the field, I don't think it's a crazy thing to do, especially like for an elite tier player that's in really good form. And then the other prop I took, and on Prize Picks is the only site where at least I've seen it so far, is we have some guys down here for the other event. So this is the Puerto Rico Open. Birdie average last year was about like 4.3 per round. And one of these guys at 4.5 birdies I took for an over on birdies because he's going off super early tomorrow. The guy I took was a top 5 birdie percentage player on tour last year, which, by the way, you go to the top 5 of the birdie percentage, you're going to know who I'm talking about. It's going to be very obvious who I went and took for that kind of over. So, hey, if you're willing to do the 2 seconds of research, you can figure out who I played right there. I took those kind of plays, though, right, on the DP World Tour side, over there on the Puerto Rico Open side, and mixed it in with fades over there for the PGA event at API. So I think that's the really good way to go about it, right? Try and mix these golf tournaments if you want to play on Prize Picks, because if you want to go with the fades, which I think is the prudent move with the conditions that we're getting, I mean, 35-mile-an-hour wind gusts are just nothing to fuck around with. You'd be lucky to shoot even par tomorrow with those kind of conditions. If this kind of thing holds up, that's why I would try and mix it in, right? Because you don't want to be taking 2.5x payouts. We didn't get 2.7x over here on the underdog side. So if you only want to enter subs for API, at least if you agree with me on the fade lean, then do it over here, right? Don't do it on Prize Picks because of the payout difference. Lovely jubbly, that's for sure. Bro, every time I see it, you just crack me up. And I appreciate that, Derek. Good luck as well out there this week. Alrighty, guys, that's all I've got for the live stream. Going to go ahead and cut it off here. I've got some dinner to get in the belly. I'm cooking a few steaks. Having actually one of my buddies come over. We're going to play some video games. And hey, any leftovers, I guess I'll let them have some of the steak. But looking forward to that. Looking forward to all the golf that we have ahead. I haven't quite decided if we're going in person yet. If I do, it'll be for Saturday, Sunday. But next week at the Players Championship, we're going to be there the entire week. So for Boots on the Ground, reports out there for the players. I'll be there Wednesday through Sunday. So look forward to all of that. But for this week, we've also got Showdown over the weekend as well. So for all the Showdown streams, make sure to follow the Ship It Nation YouTube. I'll be live on their channel for rounds 2 through 4. And then for all the prop and betting stuff for rounds 2 through 4, right? We don't just do round 1. When it comes to the free plays, make sure to follow this YouTube right here, Gsluke DFS, as we'll be going live for that for rounds 2 through 4 as well. So I'll be doing that. If I'm up there in person, we'll be doing it from Orlando, to give you guys a little bit of a boots on the ground weather action while we're up there for the weekend. And we'll rinse and repeat, do the same thing over there for the players. But best of luck with all of their exposure that you guys are going with. And I'll see you guys out there for all the content throughout the week.